Elizabeth Kucinich. Thank you so much.
So, Elizabeth, I understand that you worked for the American Monetary Institute, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to monetary reform. And I'm wondering if you feel that monetary and thus social change is possible without removing control of currency from private banking interests, such as those represented by the Federal Reserve Bank or other central banks. And I'm wondering what a Kucinich presidency would offer in terms of fundamental monetary reform.
Well, we have to understand that the private ownership and control of the money supply really is the wellspring from which all of the other social and environmental disintegration is coming from. When our money supply is expanded through having to borrow more money into circulation, so every single year we need more and more money circulated because population growth, economic activities, etc. So very few people think about how that money is actually brought into existence. They just, maybe think the government prints it or something. The government doesn't print it. Literally, the private central banks have been given the right and privilege to create money out of nothing and lend it into circulation at interest. And so yes, we need to change that mechanism. The Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express. It's a private organization. So whether we like it or not, the money power is the fourth branch of government. Whether we bring it under democratic control or not, the money supply really is what is controlling the direction of America, the direction of the world. So yes, we would advocate that the fourth branch of government should be the Federal Reserve that comes into government control, then would have full accountability to the American people and would be able to work from there.
Okay.
There's a video that your viewers might be interested in. It's called Money as Debt, and I would suggest that they go to Google and just look at it. It's 47 minutes long and it's a cartoon, but it really gives a very good in-depth overview and introduction to this system and what's required, and also shows how you can't have sustainability within the environment without a sustainable and permanent money supply, and so that's really connected. And so I came into monetary policy through the environmental route.
So I understand that Representative Kucinich is a gun control advocate, and I'm wondering how he balances that stance with the stance of the perceived need for public safety with the constitutional right to bear arms as part of a system of checks and balances upon the government's tendency to impose its will and its agenda on the rights and civil liberties of the individual.
Well, the right to bear arms, the right to well-regulated militia, the concerns that we have at the moment with the administration, the number of executive orders that we've seen being passed, one of the most recent ones which says that under a condition of a national emergency, then the military could come in and take over police powers. We see that we really do need that well-regulated militia, that civilian power. So when we're talking about regulation of guns, we're actually talking about what we see in our cities at the moment. We're seeing an enormous rate of homicides, enormous rate of gun violence, and that's generally to do with handguns. And when you can conceal a small handgun, then nobody's really safe. And we need to really look at how many people are dying on our streets every single day from just having this general warfare within our inner cities. And how can we balance a well-regulated militia with the whole situation with guns in the streets? And I would suggest that really we have to have a well-regulated militia, and just having anyone who's not necessarily reliable and safe with the gun to hold a gun isn't really in the general welfare, in the benefit of the general welfare. So we need to see what the Supreme Court is going to make its decision on, whether everybody having guns means a well-regulated militia, or whether a well-regulated militia means a well-regulated militia, and we will adhere to whatever the Supreme Court decides on that. But we really do have to look at public health and safety as well.
And then how would the well-regulated militia function differently than the United States Armed Forces?
This is something that really needs to be worked out with the civilian population.
Okay. I'm wondering what your husband's stance is on the proposed North American integration of the sort that seems to be attempted by the Security and Prosperity Partnership, which is a working group consisting of the U.S., Canada, Mexico, with the stated aim of improving security and prosperity for all three nations, but which many have argued constitutes a coalition of working groups that are rewriting United States administrative law outside the reach of congressional oversight or public debate. So I'm wondering, what is his stance on globalization versus national security and North American integration?
Well, we hear all this rhetoric about national security. We heard the rhetoric about, you know, increased prosperity in alliances with the passage of NAFTA. So let's go and have a look at NAFTA and then look at national security afterwards. The passage of NAFTA, we were promised better paying jobs in America, greater industry, etc., etc. What did we see? Everything reduced, industry leave the country. What was Mexico promised? The same thing. What did they see? The peso drop in value, people not being able to feed their families, being really able to leave their lands, going into work in factories where there's no workers' rights, no human rights, no environmental quality principles. We can really change things, but we have to change these trade agreements. And we need to make sure that the people who are talking about these alliances are not the same people. You know, America is a sovereign nation. America has a government. America has to, you know, the people have to engage in the democratic process in order to maintain that government and maintain integrity of it. But we have to see how, within these trade agreements, we need a change. I think, when I look at these kinds of things, that it's the same moneyed interests, these private interests, who want to just see the free flow of goods, the free flow of capital, the free flow of everything, to the disadvantage of the different nations involved. And we really need to change our trading agreements. We need to, as people, stand up for ourselves, stand up for America, stand up for our industry, and say, let's cancel NAFTA. And let's rewrite our trade agreements with all the nations of the world based upon workers' rights, human rights and environmental quality principles, so that we can use trade as a mechanism to lift up not only America and American industry, but to lift up the lot of everybody else around the world. We can have smart government that does that. And what was the second part of the question?
Well, I'm just wondering, how do you balance national sovereignty with globalization? It seems that globalization is unavoidable, and yet is national sovereignty a concept that's obsolete, or?
I think we have to work with the world community. We have to remain very loyal to our constitution and the constitution of other nations. And what we've seen with national security doctrine that we have at the moment, peace through strength, preemption, unilateralism, first strike, war as an instrument of policy. In short, war to create peace. Well, war doesn't create peace. War creates war creates destruction. It creates the undermining of other people's civil liberties as well as our own, the undermining of our economy as well as other people's, the destruction of our country as well as the destruction of others. What does that equal? No security. It's not a national security doctrine, it's a national insecurity doctrine, and it doesn't work. So what we have at the moment with the fear-based politics that we have is the perpetuation of something which isn't working. We advocate something different called strength through peace, turning on its head that peace through strength, strength through peace. Direct engagement with the world community, upholding international law, acknowledging, you know, when we sign on to international treaties, they become documents that are incorporated into the Constitution. That's legally what it is. So when we sign up to these kinds of things, we have to adhere to the laws of the international community and uphold them. And again, this is a way that America can be strong. We can uphold the sovereignty of this country, and so we should. We also need to uphold the sovereignty of other nations, respect other nations' laws by working with them cooperatively, not as a nation above nations, using coercion as a force.
Okay. And then I have a question about, I know that Representative Kucinich has advocated a withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraq in favor of rotating in UN peacekeeping troops. My understanding is that the fundamental issue is to secure against U.S. monopolizing of the oil reserves in Iraq.
Well, what we have at the moment is, allegedly a war, but it's an occupation of Iraq, based on lies, no evidence for it. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, with Al-Qaeda's role in 9/11, had no intention or capability of attacking us. Our administration ramped up the rhetoric to war, brainwashed the media brainwashed the American people, and there we are. in a war which we shouldn't be involved in. It's costing us up to $2 trillion to be there. 4,000 of our brave young men and women have died out there. Tens of thousands of veterans are coming home, wounded either physically or emotionally, many of whom are on the streets. This war has not only devastated the people of America, it's devastated obviously the people of Iraq. Over 1 million innocent Iraqi civilians have died in this. Now, we look at the legislation that you're talking about, House Resolution 1234, the plan to end the Iraq War. Just in case there's anyone out there who wants to do some peace marching, 1234, the plan to end the Iraq War. This plan is talking absolutely about withdrawing the troops. But we need there to be, as we've heard in the media, well, if you withdraw the troops, then there's going to be this vacuum that's created, and then terrorists will come in, and then what will Iraq be? Well, that may well be the case, but our occupation is fueling the violence. There's a resistance force out there as well as terrorist organisations out there, and we have to differentiate and understand the difference between the two. Now, 80%, it is estimated that 80% of the violence which is in Iraq is due to us being there. So when we remove our forces, then you're left with 20% of the violence. But then if we bring in international security and peacekeeping force that moves in as our troops leave, that transition in, they hold that space, they deal with that, and then we don't have our administration monopolising, occupying Iraq, and also, which we see in our benchmarks, which is what you alluded to, a benchmark that was set into the appropriations bill of a few months ago for $97 billion, had stipulations that the Iraqi administration had to adhere to. And one of those was something embodied in what we call the Hydrocarbon Act. And the Hydrocarbon Act was said to be, oh, this great peace proposal which talked about the equitable distribution of oil revenues between the three major groups. That may have been in the first page or two. The rest of the document was how it is that we can privatise Iraq's oil reserves, and obviously we can't do that. An occupying force is an illegal force, and that's what we are there at the moment. We have to come home so that there can be a proper peace process, so that we can have a political reconciliation between the Shiites, the Sunnis and the Kurds without undue influence from our administration. Then that's just the first part of this House Resolution 1234.
Now, how do you prevent, with the UN Security Council, how do you prevent any of the permanent members who have the veto power from using that to secure their energy interests at the expense of Iraqi national sovereignty?
We may actually have not to use the United Nations. The United Nations is a large organisation that has the ability to mobilise and organise such a peacekeeping force. But we may well have to engage, whoever it is that the Iraqi people want to work with. Is it the League of Arab Nations? Maybe that should be an organising force. Brothers and sisters coming in from the rest of the Arab world, literally holding the space, stopping the warring factions within the inside. There's so many different organisations that can do it. The thing is, we have to get out of Iraq, and we have to work with the world community in organising that peacekeeping and security force. And Dennis has been working with over 24 ambassadors and a number of different presidents from around the world, asking them, would you be willing to put together a peacekeeping and security force should we leave? And all of the international community that we've spoken to have said absolutely, but under the auspices that America has absolutely no control in Iraq. They really end the occupation, close the bases, bring the troops home, bring the equipment home, and the private contractors and the private mercenaries literally stake no claim to that country. Then the world community will support Iraq, but it will not support the United States occupation of that country.
Okay, final question, if as much as you can address of it. Healthcare. I know that Dennis has advocated a not-for-profit universal single-payer healthcare system, and I'm wondering, does the government fund that, and if so, through taxpayer revenues, and if so, how do you keep the government from legislating degrees of control over people's lives where their lifestyle choices might intersect with their healthcare needs?
Well, let's have a look at what we have at the moment. We've got a healthcare system which is owned and controlled by the insurance companies, and we know that health insurance companies make money not providing healthcare. We currently spend twice per capita the amount of money that all the other industrialized nations that provide healthcare to their people spend. So we are already paying twice as much as anyone else, any other countries, and we're not getting the healthcare we need. We spend over $2.2 trillion on healthcare expenditures, but 1 in every 3 of those dollars goes for the for-profit system, and by that I mean executive salaries, stock options, advertising, marketing, the cost of administration. If we take that 1 in every $3, that equals $700 billion a year. If we take that $700 billion, put it with the other money that we already pay, put it all into healthcare, not into profit, but into service, then we have enough money not only to cover every single American's basic healthcare needs, doctor's visits, hospitals, etc. We have enough money to pay for dental care, mental health care, long-term care, prescription drugs, vision care, hearing care. We have an annex bill to cover complementary health care as well. So all of that can be covered with the money that we're already spending, but we're not seeing the product of that. Even those who have health insurance at the moment aren't guaranteed that they'll get the care they need. You just look at Michael Moore's documentary Sicko to see that those people interviewed in there had healthcare coverage but couldn't get treatment. And we need a system which now serves the people. This is looking at the function of government. Government is to do for people collectively what they can't do for themselves individually. And healthcare has to be a service, not a business. It doesn't work as a business. That means that it's a privilege according to whether you can pay for it or not. A service has to be something that everybody has access to. And when we look at that, when we make it more cost effective and allow all the American people to have healthcare coverage, that reduces the cost for them as individuals because they're not paying premiums, co-pays or deductibles to have it. Industry doesn't have to pay the amount of money that it's paying at the moment for healthcare costs. If you look at Ford and GM, they estimate that up to $1,500 per car goes to healthcare costs, not to profit, not to expansion of industry, not to the workers, but to healthcare costs. So we can really, help industry, help business, help entrepreneurs, help families, help children. Everybody's covered in the system. Now, how do we pay for that? We already pay 2.9% for Medicare, comes out of the payroll. But you can only get Medicare once you fulfill certain criteria. So what we advocate is another couple of percent that comes out of the salary. Now, if you think what's an average salary, say $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 maybe, 2% out of that is an enormous amount less than you're paying at the moment for health insurance, and you get everything covered without premiums, co-pays and deductibles. So it's cost effective. And under this system, it's not socialized medicine. It's not the government owning the hospitals, owning the doctors, controlling that. It's government being the single payer. So instead of having 300 million American individuals paying, you have one person or one organization paying. Then you have the purchasing power of 300 million Americans. You can drive down the cost of pharmaceuticals. What pharmaceutical company isn't going to want to do business with an organization that represents 300 million people? Well, none of them. They will all work cooperatively, just as the Veterans Administration works with the pharmaceutical companies. So this is a way of making it cost effective, covering everyone and supporting industry and business as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to Colorado.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.